And so I took that shot, bullet zips through him, gets a nice exit wound, and he takes this big breath and just puffs a massive vapor cloud out at that exit hole, right? And he's gone.
Welcome to the Big Game Hunting Podcast, where we help hunters like you prepare for the big game hunting adventures you've always dreamed of. Now, here's your host, John McAdams.
Hello, John McAdams here. Welcome to episode 359 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast. I got the chance to sit down with Aaron Davidson from Gunwerks at the Dallas Safari Club convention in Atlanta back in January. He and I discussed the ins and outs of bullet selection, external ballistics, and terminal performance. This was an absolutely fantastic discussion. Now, I felt like I was drinking from a fire hose talking to him, but he does a fantastic job of breaking down why he uses various bullets for certain situations, why he opts for certain shot placement with certain bullets, how various bullets behave differently with different impact velocities and different shot placement on animals, why Gunwerks offers certain bullets in their ammo but not others, what he thinks about the new 7 Backcountry, and much more. And of course, he shares a couple of great stories to illustrate the points he makes as well. Now, Aaron and I recorded this episode on the convention floor in Atlanta, so that's why you may hear some background noise. Even so, the content is great. I know you will enjoy it. Before we get started, I want to know what you want to hear in future episodes. If you listen on Spotify, leave a comment on this episode with your topic requests. If you listen on Apple or another podcasting service, leave a review with your topic requests. Make sure you leave the show a 5-star rating when you do that. Now, these requests can be about anything in the hunting/shooting world. Just let me know what you want to hear. And also, make sure you are on my email list. If you like the podcast, you will love those emails I send out every weekday about hunting, shooting, ballistics, etc. Sign up at the link in the show notes or at biggamehuntingpodcast.com/ebook. Okay, let's get started talking to Aaron.
All right, well, Aaron, it is a pleasure to talk to you today. It is great to meet you, and I'm glad to talk to you on the podcast.
Great. Glad to be on the podcast.
Well, we'll just dive right into things with ballistics over the years. I've listened to some of your episodes on your podcast and some of your appearances on other people's shows over the years, and there were questions that I had that just kind of come up listening to some of the things that you talk about. And one of the things I like to do is talk to people on my show in such a way that I ask kind of the everyday questions that I have that I just always want to ask people. So first up, you, I know, have hunted with a lot of different bullets over the years. You've talked about, I'm sure, the Barnes LRX, Hornady ELDX, Hornady ELD match, different Berger bullets, hammer bullets, all of that stuff. Can we talk a little bit about how those different bullets perform differently when they hunt game, or when they impact the game at different ranges and at different velocities and all of that stuff? And we can use that to dive into some of your choices that you've narrowed down to and seem to have focused on more recently. Let's start with, say, the copper bullet.
You know what? Actually, the way that I like to organize thought, I want to back up and talk a little bit bigger picture first.
Sure.
For me, it's very important to understand what we're trying to achieve before we start making selections.
Mm-hmm.
I've been getting into the aviation recently, and and all of a sudden you're like, okay, I need to buy a plane, and then the next thing is I need to buy a bigger plane,
mm-hmm.
and the thing that everybody always gets back to is, what's your mission,
mm-hmm.
right? And if you don't define your mission, you could end up making some bad spending choices and being unhappy with what you've done, and it's the same thing with the bullet. We need to define our mission, and to back up into that, we have to say, well, what are we trying to do? We're trying to harvest an animal. We're trying to kill something.
Yep.
Right. So there's our mission, right? Straight up. And everybody that's hunting starts with the same mission. We're trying to effectively kill the game that we're pursuing. So what is the mechanism that achieves that outcome?
Mm-hmm.
Right? How do we kill? And this is where I think getting some let's say demystifying the what actually happens helps us down the road when we're trying to choose one of these different bullets, for achieving that mission. So the core thing to remember is that that if anybody tries to say, shock or energy or any of these other things, they're not talking about the mechanism that kills.
Mm-hmm.
The way that we kill animals is we drain them of blood. It's called exsanguination. And what we're trying to do is poke a hole through the right vitals that is big enough and deep enough that for that animal's capacity of blood and ability to circulate and size, that they run out of sufficient quantities of blood to continue bodily functions.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as we can accept that definition as how we're successful, then that starts to guide us towards choices on bullets and cartridges.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do we actually need? There's this whole school of thought about, you have to hit it with a hammer that's so big, and you have so much. This is my favorite bullcrap word is knockdown power. Right. And so so people are trying to, find this magic that has this combination that just flattens an animal when you hit it. And again, that's not how animals die. So we got to poke a hole that's big enough and round and deep enough in depth that it bleeds out and can no longer cease to function. Now, there's a handful of other methods of death. You can cause major trauma to the central nervous system. That'll do it. There's some real rare cases of transmitting some shock through the hydraulics into a brain and causing enough damage that it, ceases function. But we're talking about fractions of the total. So that the most animals die from exsanguination. All right. So I built a really nice chart where I collected animal size versus wound cavity volume required to kill.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of this was based on the work of a Dr. Rathcone,
mm-hmm.
who did just a massive amount of empirical testing, a little bit older set of bullets, but as an engineer, we learn how to use data and to extrapolate concepts. So I based a lot of my early knowledge and research off of his work, and then obviously backed it up with a lot of field research myself. The chart tells you for this much animal weight and size, the thoracic depth, which is how deep the vitals are, is X, and the wound cavity volume and required depth of penetration equals this. So you can start to pick out, say, okay, I'm chasing an elk, I'm chasing this, I'm doing that. I need to have something in this ballpark of damage. And what you come to realize pretty quickly is it doesn't take that big of a combination
mm-hmm.
to kill the animals that we're chasing, at least here in North America. And there's considerations, like obviously our animals aren't shooting back at us, so we're not worried about that aspect. In North America, except for brown bears, the animals aren't really going to kill us. So there's that consideration that you have to take in. So I'm talking pretty much ungulates that are dinner,
Mm-hmm.
So now let's start talking about the mechanism that makes bullets work. And essentially there's three core components of a wound cavity that we need to understand, because that's what you're essentially manipulating with different bullet types and different cartridge sizes or impact velocities is the wound cavity.
Mm-hmm.
So we've already decided I need a wound cavity of X to kill an animal that's comparable to this. Then I have to find, the bullet combination and with velocity, impact velocity, and bullet construction that delivers a satisfactory wound cavity. And a lot of that has to do with, well, what are the types of shots we're going to take and how far we're going to shoot. So the three components of the wound cavity are the upset distance, the cavitation, and then we'll call it the final penetration.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can imagine a varmint bullet, very thin-skinned copper bullet, some type of plastic or lead tip on the front with no bonding and a reasonably high impact velocity. Our expectation is that bullet is going to impact and immediately start to expand. So the upset distance virtually goes to zero. And then the expansion is expected to be completely consumed all at once. So you get this big round ball of cavitation. And then the bullets fragmented into pieces so small that they pretty much have no final penetration depth. Mm-hmm. So you're just doing this amount of damage initially. And we'll use this bullet as an example for why any type of energy metric is a failed metric for performance. If I take a 22-250 and put a varmint bullet in it and load it up hot and calculate my kinetic energy at 75, 80 yards, like by the books, I have enough energy to kill an elk. Mm-hmm. And you get a big old bull, big old rutting bull, and he's been stomping around in the walls, and he's got a big old muddy shoulder, and it's dried and caked on there. And you pull up right up on that elk, and you shoot him right on the shoulder. Like, you may not even penetrate enough to get to the bone of the shoulder. For sure, not through the bone. Very likely, you dump a whole bunch of it on the surface before you even penetrate. And so there's a real quick example. That's an engineering trick. Is you test a theory at the limits to see if it still holds true. And so when somebody says, "Oh, you got to have 2,000 foot-pounds to kill an elk," well, first of all, I think, well, they don't know anything. Mm-hmm. Like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And you see those things propagated everywhere, because right there, I just showed you an example where 2,000 pounds doesn't kill an elk. That's mm-hmm. not the secret recipe. So that's that bullet. Now we take that 22-250 and we put a 60 grain Barnes bullet in it and put it in the same scenario. Guess what? That bull's dead.
You get a much longer penetration depth. Yep. With a more narrow yep. cavitation.
And if you shoot a Barnes triple shock versus a Barnes tip triple shock, you'll get some variation in the behavior mm-hmm. of that bullet. So we can see right away that the choice of bullet combined with the cartridge and the animal and the type of shot we want to take they're all intertwined. Mm-hmm. They're all part of that. So I like to try to break things down into classifications so that I can have some type of rules that I can apply. Our wind compensation system or process that we've been teaching for almost 2 decades at our long-range shooting school just really groups things into simple, executable knowledge and process that's repeatable. It's doable by somebody that's not an expert, somebody that doesn't have to shoot all the time. I like to do the same thing with the terminal ballistics. That's actually probably one of the things that has made our class more significant and unique than all of the upstarts that have kind of come along in the last few years is our focus on terminal ballistics and really understanding what our goal is. And that's why I'm able to wax so eloquent, is we've been teaching this stuff for almost mm-hmm. probably 15, 18 years in this format. So I like to group my bullets specifically into 3 different classifications. One of them is the common copper jacket lead core with some type of lead or plastic tip, mm-hmm. and I'll classify that as an expanding bullet. And we'll maybe get into a little bit more of why I clearly said a plastic or lead tip. The next type of bullet let's call it a match type bullet, mm-hmm. and so now we're still copper jacket lead core, with the significant difference of the copper jacket is smashed down to a tip at the front, and that has a very, very significant impact on the upset distance of that bullet. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then the third classification is let's call it controlled expansion bullet. Mm-hmm. Okay, and that could be a Swift Scirocco. That could be a Nosler partition. That could be a Barnes triple shock. Now, those are all 3 very different bullets, mm-hmm. and they don't necessarily behave the same, but technically what we're really looking at is there is some mechanism to guarantee some remained mass that can create a residual penetration depth.
Mm-hmm.
So if we go back and compare these bullets, the start with the expanding one, it's going to behave a lot just like we talked about with the varmint bullet. Now, what we'll do when we get into a hunting type bullet is we'll thicken the jacket a little bit
Mm-hmm.
and make the jacket a little stiffer. We'll maybe run a little bit heavier bullet and slow it down a little so the impact velocities are less. And those bullets can do a lot of damage. I mean, think about all the animals that were killed with a Winchester ballistic silver tip ammunition.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in 30-30 Winchester, or like I run that in my 30-30 and my 250 Savage, both. Just factory Winchester ammo. It's awesome. That bullet is going to have a very small upset distance. It's going to expand a lot in the cavitation phase of the wound cavity, and you can't really count on it. Might, but you can't count on that final penetration depth.
Mm-hmm.
The difference between that bullet and a match type bullet is literally all in the upset distance and what behaves. If I back up just for 1 second and explain how we get bullets to go through an animal straight. In the air, we stabilize the bullet by spinning it almost 300,000 RPMs. And that creates a really rigid spin axis that resists the overturning moment of the air pressure being forward of the center of gravity. And the instant that we penetrate into soft tissue, now the density is almost 100%. And in air, it's so small, and we're just playing these games of an inch faster twist and this and that to try to make it stabilize. Well, all of a sudden we go from very little density to massive amount of density. Mm-hmm. There is no spin stabilization for that bullet anymore. So it doesn't matter how fast the bullet's spinning, it is not stable. And as soon as a bullet goes unstable, it starts turning and going different directions. And a lot of times will tumble completely around and end up exiting butt first. Mm-hmm. I've seen bullets, like this was a barn situation 2.5 decades ago in a 270 in a long shot where the bullet didn't expand and it came out the same side of the animal that it went in. So the bullet literally steered all the way around. And in a lot of early bullet testing, we were using those wax bullet tubes. Like we had a hard time keeping bullets in the tubes because they would tumble and steer right out the side. Mm-hmm. So the mechanism that actually gets a bullet to penetrate straight through is called shoulder stabilization. And this is why in a dangerous game gun, and my background, I actually got into handguns and Elmer Keith and making my own bullets and shooting animals at long range with that before I got into rifle stuff.
Mm-hmm. So you're using a lot of wad cutters and semi-wad cutters.
Oh, yeah, semi-wad cutters, and then kind of got into that wide flat nose and really, really started to understand that. And Rathcombe, Dr. Rathcombe, did a lot of studies on those flat nose bullets. And so when you're looking at a dangerous game gun and a solid, the best thing that you can do is you don't want a round nose. Like they do the round nose so it feeds a gun that requires it. Technically, that's the worst thing you could do in a dangerous game bullet. You want a big flat nose, and then you need a gun that'll feed that big flat nose because that will hit. And when it starts penetrating with that big flat nose, let's say the bullet's not stable anymore. It tries to turn a little bit. The flat nose will balance the forces. So the leading edge that starts to turn in, it will get more pressure and it will push back, and the trailing edge will kind of find the balance. And so that's called shoulder stabilization. That's why that perfect bullet shape is actually this mushroomed bullet, because now you have this big, wide, flat nose that has the balancing forces. There's a small effect called tail stabilization, kind of like an arrow, where there's drag at the tail that helps support that. But it's shoulder stabilization. That's what gets the penetration. So in an expanding bullet, that nose is the plastic or the lead is so soft that it disappears very quickly relative to carbon, and so you're left with a bigger diameter face. So if you have forces, right, and then you have area, you can get higher PSI, and you can overcome the stress required to deform copper. So so that bullet will actually expand just like we picture. The nose will fail and start to peel back, and you'll end up with a mushroom shape. And with those, the jacket's so thin, it'll just keep expanding and keep shedding until it disintegrates into nothing. A lot of times, the high spin rate combined with that initial expansion sometimes will cause a bullet to pretty much come apart completely. That's what the thicker jacket helps us with. If you go to the VLD shape, here's where the difference comes. With the VLD shape, you don't have much surface area in the front. And also, by nature of closing that tip, you almost create this solid copper nose. So essentially, and I see the guys on the forums, they talk about, you got to drill out the hollow point so the bullet expands. Those bullets don't expand. The tip never peels back and fails. It just doesn't happen. The characteristic for a VLD bullet is it starts to penetrate, goes unstable, starts to tumble, and the jacket's thin enough that the nose just breaks off, and then all hell breaks loose, and it comes apart. So the significant thing about the VLD is you have a great big upset distance. And if I can translate this into something that feels a little bit more visceral. Early testing, when I was learning and discovering, I put a piece of 1/2-inch steel plate up at 300 yards, and I shot it with Nosler partition. I shot it with a Barnes, shot it with a ballistic tip, shot it with a Berger VLD, and Barnes made a copper smudge. Nosler made a little bit of a dent with a lead smudge. The ballistic tip made a lead smudge, and the Berger poked a hole straight through it. So to translate that into your realm of thinking, the ability of a bullet to penetrate before either tumbling or before the nose starting to expand and initiating that cavitation portion of the wound cavity is you can penetrate through shoulder muscle tissue. You can penetrate through bone. Like it'll bust through bone like a Barnes will do it. But that nothing goes through a shoulder like a match bullet does. And so the perfect elk medicine for me was always a 168 grain 7mm bullet on a shoulder of an elk, penetrating hide, muscle, bone, and that bone was a significant part of that expansion matrix, and then it would just liquefy the lungs, and I would have a dead elk there, potentially even sending some fragments up into the nervous system. So a high shoulder will get shoulder, lungs, and maybe a little bit of spine, boom, anchors him right there. Plus, you get a huge wind margin with that aim point. So that was always my favorite, was that combination. But that initial upset distance, that massive amount that you get out of that match bullet, gives you the ability to get in there before it tumbles and comes apart. Now, the second piece I was alluding to there with the match bullet was when you do impact bone, it won't peel the tip back and it won't expand, but it can collapse the other part of the bullet and essentially cave it in on itself and flatten it out and fail it that way as well. So there's another reason why I like a little bit of bone involved.
So I've heard two things about expansion mechanisms from different sources over the years on these Berger bullets in particular. I've heard what you just talked about with the bullet starting to yaw, and then the front half of it breaking off just like that. And I've also heard the front portion of it caving in and it going out the sides like you just described. So it sounds like either can happen, but it depends upon what exactly they hit and how fast it's going, I imagine, as well then.
Yeah, correct.
And it also sounds like, too, to back up for a second, you talk about your expanding bullets versus your match bullets. By your definition, something like a tipped Match King or a Hornady ELDM would fit into the expanding bullet and not the match bullet category.
Correct.
So the match bullet category would mainly be Bergers and then say some of the old maybe Sierra Game Kings.
Hornady's got the hollow point boat tails, and they've just relaunched kind of their new ones. The Sierra. Yep. And then Berger VLDs, those would be the big ones.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So that all makes sense, but that's an important thing for the listener to keep in mind. Say that just because it says match in the description of it doesn't necessarily mean, according to your definition, that it's a match bullet.
Yeah. What matters is my categorization, not the bullet manufacturer's categorization.
And all of those different expanding bullets that you talk about.
Just for the record, I think they do that so that you can shoot people overseas without violating the
Hague Convention.
Yes.
I've heard that as well through different rumor sources. I've never heard it confirmed from.
Well, I'm not a bullet guy, but that's what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it would make sense what you're saying with this here. But with the Hornet, all these different expanding bullets that you talked about here, Remington Core-Lock, Winchester PowerPoint, ballistic tip.
Here's a couple bullets that are going to start skirting the Remington Core-Locked. You look at the ELD-X. That one also tends to place it more in the category of the penetrating type bullet. Because it's got a mechanism in place that retains weight. And, if you go back 10, 12, 14, 15 years, I've actually been around in this industry too long. I'm starting to get a little mushy. But the gun writers and the bullet purveyors had this big discussion about retained weight and about judging the bullet's performance based on how much weight it retains. And so there's bullets that are designed, mechanisms invented and implemented that enhance that retained weight. And those, if it's actually successful and not vaporware and BS, that actually places it in the controlled expansion category.
And so with the controlled expansion category and with your expanding bullet category, there is a continuum within them. Some are softer and tougher than others and whatnot.
For sure.
Yeah.
And technically, every shot out of every bullet, out of every gun, at every distance, for every animal is completely different. So there's no way to say this is the best. There's a scenario where you can engineer it's the best. Take, for example, I'm shooting mountain goat in Alaska or BC, and I've busted my butt to get this goat. We're in the nastiest, ruggedest stuff, and I see a big billy, and he's in a really bad spot. If I can kill him, I can hike to him, and I can recover him. If I shoot him, and he goes for a little bit of a walk or a jump, he's going to get into a place where maybe he's non-recoverable, or maybe I damage my trophy. And so in that scenario, which one of those three classifications of bullet are the right one?
Yeah, it would
550 yards.
Yeah, it would certainly seem like either your match bullet or your expanding bullet would be the way to go.
Okay, I'm going to knock the match bullet out of the ideal bullet, specifically because of that initial upset distance. And what'll happen have you killed a mountain goat?
I have not.
Okay, they're an amazing animal. They really are, and they're so tough and strong and actually pretty massive. But if you look at the thoracic depth,
real thin.
They're very thin, and that's an evolutionary thing, because if you're hanging the side of a cliff, you don't want to be as thick as me, because as close as you get to the cliff, you still got mass that's hanging out over into space. And so they're very thin animals, especially in the thoracic. So when you shoot it with a match bullet, it will zip through and potentially not have enough time at that distance to tumble and turn and create a wound cavity that you want. Now, let's say you're perfect and you zip it through shoulder and spine and you sever his spinal cord and you anchor him. Fine. Like, there's a scenario that works all the time. But let's just say you shoot like the rest of us and you're just hoping to hit a 12 to 18 inch window on that goat. You can't guarantee you're going to sever the spine. So we need something that's acting fast. I actually want the expanding bullet. I want an ELD match bullet, right? Because the instant that touches a piece of hair or hide or whatever, I want it to start coming apart, and I want it to act fast. I want fragments into the lungs. I want stuff up into the spine. I want it to absolutely vaporize him. And I'm going to try to pick up some bone and some spine and all that in that aim point. So, that's what I'm looking for. If you go to Texas and you're hunting whitetail and it's thick, and you're hunting a place that's got big bucks, and they've got this one elusive buck that's been really hard to kill, and they've been watching him for years. They tried to get him last year, and a couple guys got him, couldn't get a shot off quick enough, and you're hunting another area, and all of a sudden this buck appears, and it's 500 yards, and you've got a shot opportunity. What bullet's the best bullet?
Probably the match bullet in this case.
Okay, now I'm going to argue. I'm going to take a different stand. I propose that the Barnes tipped triple shock is the right bullet.
Okay.
And the reason why is, remember, the way that an animal dies that we know is going to die is exsanguination.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't happen instantly.
Mm-hmm.
You get it in your mind. It's like you shoot it, it's dead. That's not the case. Like you shoot it and it takes time to die. That animal might run 100 yards.
Yeah.
Like you could shoot it in the heart and it might run 100 yards and live. If you double lung it, like it could be that far or farther.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you shoot that bull with a match bullet, that deer with a match bullet. You get this penetration. Usually the entrance wound's very small. You double lung it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't pick up shoulder. You get this small entrance wound. Bullet comes apart, shreds the lungs, doesn't do anything on nervous system. It takes off running, and it's in the brush. And all you know is it went to the left side or the right side. That's it. You don't know where it's at.
And you don't have much blood trail.
Exactly, because you may not have got an exit at that distance.
Mm-hmm.
And that could turn into a lost animal. And it's this magnificent buck that like was a once in a lifetime opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
You punch a hole through him with the Barnes and it makes a hole going in and a hole going out. And I've seen it a gazillion times. There's just blood just pumping out both sides. And now you've got this blood trail that'll take you right to where it's dead. So there's a little story to tell you how difficult it is to choose the perfect bullet for the scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've found over the years and what I've decided on was that it doesn't in cases where you're not going to get killed if you screw up, that it doesn't pay to agonize over which is the perfect combination.
Mm-hmm.
What the approach that I choose to take is, what can I shoot really well, and what bullet helps me the most put the bullet where it needs to go. So I'm really looking for my wind deflection characteristic, and I'm kind of transitioning over into some other topics that we've discussed. I also look for my retained velocity, because if you go back to that bullet performance and what makes bullets work, what I've found is that it's impact velocity related.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been teaching this forever, and I think I'm seeing a lot of our teaching concepts. I mean, we've trained 5,000 people, and we've trained trainers that have gone out and trained. Like half of the really great long range schools that are out there are people that I trained
Mm-hmm.
and taught these concepts. But if you go out there and look, like these things are starting to promulgate. So the threshold velocity, that is the number that I'm looking for. And different bullets have different. So if it's got a tip, it's lower.
Yeah.
And if it's a match bullet, it's a little higher. If it's a solid like copper bullet, it's like you stay higher. So say like Barnes 2200, Berger 2000, tipped match type bullet 1800.
Mm-hmm.
To guarantee, it's like if you're willing to accept a few flyer situations, you can probably take 200 feet per second out of each one of those.
Mm-hmm.
But so let's just say it's around 2000. So now we're getting into the choices and the selections. It's like I want low wind deflection and I want a max terminal range. So how far does my combination get me to 2,000 feet per second of retained velocity, or adjust for the bullet type?
Mm-hmm.
So that's my basis of judging. And so if as long as I'm inside of those, what I'll do, depending on the bullet that I have, is I will choose my shot. So if I've got an ELD match bullet, so I there's a really cool video. I had a little hippie phase. I had long hair and shaggy beard, and had a Utah tag for bull. And Garrett and I were hunting. Garrett's filming, I'm hunting, and we got on a bull that was a 350, 360 type bull, and out in the flat and just bugling and cold, frosty morning. And I had an 800 and some yard shot, and I'm like, he's slightly quartering towards me just a little bit, and I'm like, I got an ELD match bullet and a 7 at 800 yards. I want to ensure penetration. I'm going to put it right behind the shoulder rather than right on the shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took that shot, bullet zips through him, gets a nice exit wound, and he takes this big breath and just puffs a massive vapor cloud out at that exit hole, right? And he's gone.
Mm-hmm.
Gave him one follow-up and made sure he was good. Perfect. That's a case of I knew my bullet. I had experience with that bullet and chose that shot. I'll describe a prior experience with that bullet.
Ready to level up? Chumba Casino is your playbook to fun. It's free to play with no purchase necessary. Enjoy hundreds of casino-style games like bingo, slots, and solitaire anytime, anywhere with fresh releases every week. Whether you're at home or on the go, let Chumba Casino bring the excitement to you. Plus, get free daily login bonuses and a free welcome bonus. Join now for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. Play Chumba Casino today. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. T&Cs apply.
I had an eland at 1,300 yards, same combination, and had a 5 to 7 mile an hour crosswind, I'd estimated, and he was broadside, and I corrected for wind, overcorrected, put the bullet on the shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
And
what bullet was this?
This is a 7mm LRM shooting a 180 grain ELD match bullet around 2950-ish.
What was your impact velocity that far, you think?
I'm just guessing here, but my guess would be it was in the 1,600 feet per second range.
Mm-hmm.
So still in the category where it should have worked. But if anybody's ever seen an eland, freaking shoulder's amazing. Like, so I hit him and it did some damage. Like it dropped him.
Mm-hmm.
So it hit bone. It disrupted central nervous system. Like it dropped him. And this animal is so big, it's amazing. And we're like, okay, that was really cool. We picked up our stuff, started walking straight towards him. We got to about 1,200 yards or so. He stands back up, pointing the other direction. And I'm like, oh, what an opportunity. I get to shoot twice.
Yeah.
But surprised. But I felt like I might have broke his spine the way he reacted. And a little piece of advice, anytime an animal goes right down, pay attention, because sometimes they get back up.
Yeah.
So I got back down, and I'm like, okay, I overcorrected for wind last time. I'm going to take that into account. Reassessing the wind, I felt like it was same conditions, so I held a little bit less. He was pointing the other way. I actually need to hold more. So I put it in the other shoulder on the other side and had the same reaction. Dropped him. Just absolutely dropped him. And then when we walked up on him, and he wasn't dead yet, and I had to shoot him again from about 20 yards away, both of his shoulders were broke. Mm-hmm. Neither one would work. But the bullet was not able to get into the thoracic and make a deep enough wound cavity in the vital organs so that it would bleed out. So I had to put one there and double lung him and finished him. And so that's a good example of that concept. It's like, okay, it had the impact velocity, it had everything, but for that bullet, it was important that I double lunged him
mm-hmm.
behind the shoulder, not on the shoulder. Where if that would have been a 180 grain Berger hybrid,
mm-hmm.
the first shot would have killed him because it would have broke through that stuff before it started expanding. It would have had enough material left that it could have vaporized some lungs and it would have killed him.
So on your first example of the elk that you shot with the ELD match behind the shoulder, in that exact same situation, if you're using a Berger, you would have aimed a little bit farther forward specifically to hit the shoulder.
Yes, and to hit the shoulder, I'm not scared of hitting the shoulder,
mm-hmm.
but what a slightly forward aim point gets me is a little bit more margin for the wind.
Mm-hmm.
And if you draw a picture on an elk, pick his head up, and you draw a picture, what in the upper third, half to third region of the elk, because usually I can control my vertical on my weapon very good. Good rangefinder, good ballistics, good ammunition. You can control your vertical. But the thing you can't control is wind. And so draw a picture and you can get a 18, 20, 24-inch kill zone
mm-hmm.
on an elk, head up, all that stuff there. If you have to aim behind the shoulder, the distance between behind the shoulder to behind the liver is very small. And so you're starting to get into potentially you could slip one in the guts. And me personally, I'd rather zing one over his back or right off the front of his chest instead of one through the guts. Because you shoot an elk in the guts, you made a big mistake.
Mm-hmm.
You've made a really big mess. So I'm talking about an aim point that allows me the best plus or minus on wind. And because of the bullet type and the way it reacts when you hit, you're not going to have a potential no man's land where you potentially would with a bullet that expands too much.
So we've talked a lot about what you describe as a match bullet and what you describe as an expanding bullet here. talking a little bit more about the controlled expansion bullets, say like a Barnes, like a Partition. Oftentimes, these are lower BC bullets that you're going to hit that expansion threshold at a much shorter range than you would with these other bullets.
Yeah, so if you put that 2,200 feet per second on there, I just described a scenario where the Barnes was the perfect bullet. I'll share another one. It's like you got a 375 Ruger and you're shooting buffalo, maybe a big eland or something in Africa. Like, I'm not sure that there is a better bullet for absolutely smashing buffalo than a Barnes X. Tipped X bullet and a 375 Ruger, like, frick, it's great. Like, the bullet performance is what you want. You get expansion, so you do a bigger diameter wound cavity, but it retains so much mass and is structurally so good that you'll get the penetration depth that you want. So it makes the wound cavities you want. And if you make a mistake and hit some bone or do it on purpose, it's like you still get performance.
Yeah.
So I've outlined a couple scenarios. Okay, well, here's a scenario that really sucks. You go to California, you can't shoot lead bullets at animals for whatever the reason is there. I've got a Thule elk hunt, and we're hunting a big ranch, and we get we get on a couple great bulls. I mean, we're talking 320-ish type bulls, which is way, way, way bigger than a Boone and Crockett all-time score. I think that's in the 270s. So this is the equivalent of getting on a 450-inch Rocky Mountain, right? So you get on this animal. So we get on these couple of bulls, and they're 100 feet away from the neighbor's fence. It's just a little 4-wire low fence. It's like what if they go there and they never come back during our hunt?
Yeah.
So we're at 870 yards on a ridge top, pushing 900 yards, and they're over on this face, and they're heading up, like they're going up the ridge. They're going to go over the fence. They're going to go onto the neighbors, and maybe they don't come back. So it's kind of one of those situations where I need to shoot that far. Now, we're right at that threshold limit for distance with that copper bullet. And the reason why is because copper is less dense than lead. And if you look at what makes up a BC, it's essentially the shape, the form factor, and the weight. All copper bullets pay about, I would guess, 20% penalty in BC. And so you're going to end up with a bullet that's a little bit lighter, that starts faster, but at distance, that 20% penalty in BC starts to take away the velocity really fast. Okay, so here we are at the threshold velocity limit. We shoot that bull and stop him, like perfect shot. But he's not dead. So we shoot him again. Still not dead, broke a shoulder, so he's anchored. And we had to get up on him to finally get him killed. And I shot one later on the same hunt. That was my brother. I shot one later on the same hunt at 500 yards. Again, perfect shot. And he took 2 or 3 shots, and he was still alive when we got up to him. It's like the Barnes bullet will ensure death, but because it makes a smaller cavity, smaller diameter, like the cavitation portion is smaller, smaller diameter, and you get the penetration, so it's there. It's almost assured. They just don't bleed out as fast, and so the time it takes for them to die is longer. If you can make bigger cavitation and bigger damage, they bleed out faster and they die faster.
Everything is a give and take with this, right? The bullet needs to hit the right spot. It needs to penetrate sufficiently to reach the vitals, and it needs to cause a lot of damage to the vitals. And if it penetrates deep enough to reach the vitals and also has enough penetration to go 4 more feet, you don't really get too much more out of it. You get an exit wound out of it, but you're giving that up at the expense of a more narrow wound cavity. When you're doing it, like with this Barnes bullet here, hitting it 2,200 feet per second, like you're talking about. The Barnes bullets, in my experiences, tend to do great at close range, high velocity stuff, like you're talking about with the buffalo, where you're shooting it at 75 yards. And
let's explain why that happens. So the Barnes makes a really great expanded shape. So you get a good flat face, you get great shoulder stabilization, but there's this secondary effect. Like, let's say the bullet I shoot a 30 cal, the bullet's only expanded to like maybe 400, but I might get a wound cavity that's 2 or 3 inches big. How does that happen? Because the bullet's not damaging the tissue, right? Bullet fragments aren't damaging the tissue. how is it damaging the tissue when it's so much bigger than the actual diameter of the bullet?
Mm-hmm. I'm assuming we have a hydraulic effect that is going on here.
It's displaced tissue.
Mm-hmm.
So you think about all that tissue that bullet's impacting, right? And it has to get out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
And if anybody's ever made a mistake with a pressure washer and accidentally caught a piece of their body they're not supposed to, like, it will peel the flesh off your body. I've got a big scar on my leg from making a mistake there. It's a pressure washer times 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
And so that all that displaced tissue is essentially this high pressure water jet. I mean, we cut steel with water jets. So you got all this displaced tissue that's just hitting the face of that bullet and then getting directed straight out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's permanently damaging the surrounding tissues. And that's how you get those bigger things. So that impact velocity, that high impact velocity with the Barnes, with the big face, is what gets you that wound cavity by displacing that tissue at this higher velocity.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, there's your mechanism.
Now, one of the things I have noticed is that it seems like certain bullets, especially certain burger bullets, really seem to work better than others, or more popular than others. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. Specifically, you guys have your own loaded ammo. You have some bullet weights in it, but not others. For instance, a 140, but no 156 for the 6.5s, and then you have a 180, but no 195 grain burger in the 7s.
Okay, so let's go back. I'm going to take some credit for massive effort to educate people on how important ballistic coefficient was
mm-hmm.
and why.
Mm-hmm.
Like in our early days, like when we started our company, I started with 6.5 284 and 7 Rem Mag.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we built. And I learned that I had to make other offerings because people felt if you didn't offer 300 Rum, you couldn't make the argument, well, I don't care which one it is. I just know you're going to be happier with the 7.
Mm-hmm.
If you say, no, we don't chamber for that, then they think somehow your capability is limited, and then they go buy a Christensen or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So we made lots of different offerings for people so that we had a more persuasive argument for why you should shoot what we think you should shoot. But we in our efforts to sell people the right weight gun with the right recoil of gun, and here's a trade-off that actually doesn't have a penalty. If you increase your BC, what's your negative trade-off?
I don't know. If you're just talking purely BC, there is no negative trade-off with it.
Well, the trade-off is you have to increase your twist rate.
Mm-hmm.
But in practical matters, in the realm that we're dealing with in weights and everything, it's not a trade-off. It's not a penalty.
Yeah.
It's not a penalty that we care about.
Yeah.
So in that case, it's almost free. The increase in BC is almost free. So it's really important to run a high BC bullet. And the example that we would give, so at the time, all the old school rifle builders, the Kenny Jarretts, all these guys, Lazzaronis,
yeah.
Their thing was big 30 cals with light bullets, like 130 grain bullets.
Mm-hmm.
The laser rangefinders weren't really like prevalent. They just barely hit the scene, and I don't think the gun guys had been able to react to what that meant. So they were trying to build these super flat things like the Weatherbees, all these super flat trajectory, so that if you messed up your range,
Didn't matter so much.
Yeah, it didn't matter. You had a huge danger space, and you could still catch some meat. So when we showed up, we took a diametrically different approach. Like, I got into guns when I was in college. I'm a mechanical engineer. Like, imagine being exposed to the world of engineering and physical realities
mm-hmm.
at the same time of getting turned on to guns.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was amazing for me. Like, everything I was in the concept of guns, vibration theory, material properties, like differential equations. Everything was, how do I apply this to weapons? So it was a great time for me, and really turned me on to that. And what I realized, because I was taking in all the magazines and reading something, what I realized was everybody that was writing about this stuff was full of shit, and all the gun makers were stuck 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I just, when you start looking at, well, why is that? What evidence do you have to back that up? Is just all a bunch of frickin' wives' tales, like the 2,000 foot-pounds energy for elk. Just bullshit. So like that's where I got into the gun thing. Like that thing turned me on so much. But when we started, we're like 7 mag, and like everybody had been told by every freaking gun writer that you need knockdown power, 2,000 foot-pounds of energy, and it's got to be flat shooting, and you have to have high retained weight. Like all these things that actually don't frickin' matter. They don't matter. But that's what everybody believes. So we had this huge uphill battle. And so we created this TV program, we created video, and we showed long shots, and then we explained how this works and the science behind it, and started the first long-range training courses where we could teach people things that actually mattered. We're not shooting people. We're not in the military. We don't train all the time. We need systems and methods that help us as hunters and civilians be successful hunting, and let's cut out all the BS. And in training people, like you look at those poor guys, I remember early, like all these poor guys that have been sold this bill of goods about these big magnums and light guns and all this, like they were so scared of pulling the trigger, they almost couldn't shoot. And we had to like expose them to a couple days worth of shooting a gun that didn't crush them before they could start to settle down and actually, have some decent fundamentals and be successful. So one of the things that we really pushed in that time period was the comparison between a 7 Remington mag and a 3378 Weatherby. And this, it really took this comparison for the light bulbs to come on. And I taught so many people, and I could just see with the moment that the frickin' synapses connected and they understood, like it was game changing. It was life changing for them, because now their minds could let them buy this thing that actually would make them more successful, that they would enjoy shooting. And so you take a 7 Rem mag, 3370 Weatherby, put 168 barns in the Weatherby, crank it up as fast as you can to 3,600 feet per second. Take that 7 Rem mag with a 168. We used to load those to like 30-50, right? So you got these 2 cartridges. Now, I know how to decide which one is better for me, because I'm looking at wind deflection and I'm looking at retained velocity. So let's just do comparative velocities and set a 2,000 foot per second threshold. At 600 yards, the animal doesn't know any difference in that 168 grain bullet out of the Weatherby or the 7 Rim Mag, because the impact velocity is the same.
So 7 Rim Mag starts out going about 600 feet per second slower, higher BC. That does not slow down as fast. They meet at 600 yards.
And what you run all the data, you find out that the 7 Rem Mag actually delivers 200 yards of effective terminal performance more than the 3378. And then you can dive into the wind and all that, and you just see the superiority of it. Now, if you're shooting 300 yards, fine, it doesn't matter, right? But the trade-off is 23 foot-pounds of recoil energy versus 43 foot-pounds worth of recoil energy. And it's just, that's the trade-off. And people do not shoot heavy recoil. Every person that shows up with an ego that says recoil doesn't bother me, I'm like, well, dude, okay, fine. Maybe you're so freaking tough that it actually doesn't bother you, or so brainless that it doesn't bother you. But the gun itself is actually harder to shoot. Physically, the gun itself is harder, because if you're getting that much acceleration to create that much recoil energy, the gun itself is accelerating faster in response to accelerating the bullet the other direction. So Newton's law, equal and opposite reaction, right? So now the gun's moving faster. And this is why a light gun's harder to shoot. It's not because they don't shoot as good. It's because the gun increases the amount of movement and the rate that it is moving, so that when you shoot, the gun is actually disturbed more, which means anything that you do that could potentially influence that disturbance, like the way the gun tracks on the bag, the way your hand influences the grip, et cetera, the way that you load the bipod, all of a sudden that influences the gun's movement, and the gun moves significantly before the bullet exits. So when the gun's moving and you influence that movement before the bullet exits, now you've influenced where you're actually aiming. And that's why you shoot bigger groups. So okay, fine, you can take the recoil, but your gun actually is harder to shoot. So whether it's you or whether it's the gun sensitivity, you won't shoot it as good. And so our whole startup was, let's use science to guide us to solutions that help us deliver terminal performance at longer distances. And so you combine that piece with the ease of ballistics and the turnkey system that we had. We literally changed the entire gun industry in a matter of 2 to 3 years when we launched. Now, we're so small, it's like we doubled and tripled and quadrupled, but we're so small, it's like it didn't make me rich, unfortunately. But you look now, it's all BDC turrets. Everybody that's a real hunter knows that a BDC turret sooner or later is going to save the hunt. So it's all BDC turrets. It's all ballistic rangefinders. We started all of that. It's all high BC bullets. All of that. It's all long-range hunting schools. It's negative combs. You look at our stock designs. All our original stock designs are pervasive throughout the industry because they work, because they use engineering science to affect a result, and it creates a better product for the customer that makes that customer more effective. All the freaking game agencies are like, holy crap, how do we change our laws so these guys can't kill these animals and we can reduce our harvest rates? Because if you're a Gunwerks guy, you're a 100% guy. Like, you go out, you're coming back. And it's changed everything. It's changing game agencies. It's changing regulation for how they do animal harvest. It's changing bullet design. The whole long range bullet from Hornady came from us. We pushed that whole thing with Dave Emery for 3 years politically before they got the green light to go on it. Like that, like the industry has changed because of what we do, and it started with understanding that if you use the right bullet and take the advantage of what BC gives you, and we apply scientific principles to terminal performance, we can change everything, and that's what we did.
So right now, you got a good rangefinder. You have a ballistic turret on your rifle. Like you said earlier, you can, to a large extent, minimize your vertical dispersion with a bullet so that high velocity is not as important as it used to be 20 years ago. You also get, with that high BC bullet, you get much better wind resistance than a 130 grain 30 caliber bullet.
Yeah, you're pulling me back to the question, which was, how do we choose those bullets? Which one gives you the longest effective terminal performance and or the least amount of wind deflection? Because those don't always come together, but they're usually closely related. So take the 7 Rem Mag, for example, and you say, all right, I can shoot a 140, 168, a 180, a 195, right? So if you went and optimized a load for each one of those and determined what velocities you can run them, and you have the ballistic coefficients that the bullets have, and you plug them into the calculator, what you find at that 7 Rem Mag, you could plot a chart. You would find that somewhere around 175-ish, you got this crossover point where heavier actually gives you less terminal performance and a little bit more wind deflection, right? In these effective hunting ranges. If you go lighter, it gives you less effective terminal performance. So that's where the BC trade-off gets you, and at the high end, the velocity trade-off gets you. So you're always limited on this case size. Now, does that mean the 195 isn't a higher BC bullet? No, it is higher, but that case size can only drive it so fast, and that initial velocity does play a part. It does play a part in how you get there. So there, for every cartridge capacity size and the available powders that we have and our limits in pressures that we load to, there's going to be an optimum bullet weight BC, initial muzzle velocity combination that gives you the most efficient thing. So the reason why we don't run 195s in a 7 Rem Mag or a 7 PRC is because we're not stupid. We can do math.
You can't push that bullet fast enough to get it going. The
guys took my message about how important BC is, and they took it too far.
Too far. I feel like that's what a lot of people do with it. You talked about earlier the trade-off of going from a same weight bullet from a low BC to a high BC, 6.5 millimeter core lock, 140 grain core lock to 140 grain AccuBond or 140 grain Burger, for instance. You can launch that bullet at the same speed, much higher BC with the Burger. You go up to a higher weight bullet like a 156, It's heavier. You can't push it as fast, and so that loss in the velocity that you get with a Creedmoor or a 6.5 PRC or something like that.
Yeah, you think the BC basically is rate of velocity loss.
Yes.
Right. And unfortunately, that rate actually changes with velocity. But let's say it's rate of velocity loss. If you start with a velocity that's so low, even though your rate is less, you still end up lower than a cartridge that has a higher rate, but it starts higher.
So there's a point of diminishing returns with all of this stuff, and that's where it is.
So all you have to look at what we load, and then you'll know, okay, that's the optimum.
Yeah. So 140 for the 6.5, 180 for the 7s, etc.
And I think that the 6.5, it's probably like it's a 145. Yeah. Right. And you look at what we have for bullets, it's like you're either going 140s or you go 156. Well, 156 is too much.
Yeah.
But 140, maybe we could argue is a little light. I like the 147 ELD match.
Yeah.
That's a really sweet weight for a 6.5 PRC. Right now, there's no match type bullet equivalent that's in our lineup that we can use. So there's an example of a trade-off.
Fair enough. Now, you mentioned 6.5 284 Norma was one of your initial offerings that you made rifles in. You don't still offer rifles in that cartridge, do you?
No.
Yeah. And so, but you have picked up the 6.5 Creedmoor, you've picked up the 6.5 PRC.
So the 6.5 284 Norma, it's the reason why that didn't become the end-all be-all cartridge is the same reason why the 7LRM didn't end up becoming the end-all be-all 7. The 6.5 280 Norma there's even two versions of it. One's got a small base diameter, one's a big base diameter. And you got different dies floating around the industry. You have different chambers that are cut. You have different brasses that's manufactured. And then you have the whole realm of throat and neck sizes and, custom chambers that have been created. And anytime that a cartridge gets created and runs wild in the world before it is an official SAMI adoption, that cartridge will never become an official SAMI adoption. Technically, I mean, there's probably a few exceptions to that rule, but the problem is if somebody makes a SAMI adoption and they build the ammo and then they sell it to the world, how do they make sure it doesn't get consumed in the wrong chamber? And kill somebody? And so the problem with the 6.5 284 is it was technically a great wildcat. That's the problem.
Yeah,
our 7LRM is a superior 7mm cartridge. Right, it's a great cartridge. It was 3,000 feet per second with a 180 grain bullet. I designed the throat specifically for the 180 Burger hybrid and killed hundreds of animals with that cartridge. The 7 PRC, that's our go-to 7 now. Why? Because the 7RM will never be adopted. There's great 7 PRC ammo available in all places, and it's throated to work with a wider range of bullets. It's a superior cartridge because of those aspects, not because the case is perfect or everything's not screwed up. Hornady screwed up the 6.5 PRC. If you look at the length of the cartridge, length of the chambers, and how everything works, it's too long. We submitted a print for one of those in 2012. We called it our SLRM, short long range magnum, and the shoulder was actually back a little bit more, and we designed it so that you could seat bullets correctly. We struggle with the 6.5 PRC and short actions and magazine systems and bullet ogives, and they're not friendly with hybrid bullet shapes. And I can't tell if that was a troll on Burger just to kick them in the nuts so they couldn't. The best long range cartridges out there, 300, 7, and 6.5 PRC, don't play nice with hybrid bullets. I'm not sure if that was intentional or if it just happened that way, but it is the case. And so now you see this big push in the industry to convince everybody that seating depth doesn't matter. And I have enough data to say bullshit. That's not true.
Yeah.
So bullshit. Seating depth does matter. So, so technically with the PRCs, you're better off with a secant type, non-hybrid shape.
So of all the rifles that you're making right now, what's your most popular chamberings in it?
I maybe don't have the accurate data. I will tell you, we sell more 7 millimeter guns than any other caliber.
Mm-hmm.
But that gets to share 7 LRM, 7 PRC, 7 SOM, 28 Nosler. It shares with, there's 4 really great popular cartridges. You get into the 6.5s, it's kind of like you got a 6.5 PRC and a 6.5 Creedmoor. And you get into 30s, we try not to do 300 Win, as great as that performs. We try not to do that one. 300 PRC's there. We still do a little bit of 30 Nosler. We quit doing the 300 Rum a long time ago. Just not a lot of 30s there. So that's probably why most of 7. Technically, the recoil level in a 7 in a hunting weight gun, in my opinion, is about maximum for reality.
What is the parent case of the 7 LRM?
It's the same as the 7 PRC. That we used 375 Ruger Basic, but technically you go back and it's basically the old Newton cases. I mean, that's 30 years now?
Yeah,
maybe not quite that long. I think that was early 1900s.
I want to say like 1913.
Yeah,
something like that was when he did a lot of his
stuff.
I think
so.
Yeah,
but it's the same, right? So that's kind of cool. It's like we think we're so cool and all this new modern stuff, and not really.
Yeah. Charles Newton was way ahead of his time in many ways, and it just didn't have quite the technology to really make that stuff work back then.
You know what I've learned over 2 decades of this business is like it's not good enough to make better products. You have to sell them. You have to run a business. Like our product challenges are easy. Our business and operational challenges, that's the frickin' thing that about kills us all the time.
Yeah. That is the difference between good and great.
I think so.
Yeah.
And Charles Newton was a great innovator and a great engineer, but it never seemed to get his business organized the right way.
Yeah. Speaking of new stuff, what do you think about the new 7 Backcountry?
I am very intrigued with the whole concept. I've been apprised of it for quite some time and been around it, and have to agree that there is a lot of maybe there's some advancement mixed into this. Like if you look at we were shooting some 195s in 22-inch barrels at like just under 3,000 feet per second. Like what it's performing at for velocity is amazing. I'm curious if that advancement has maybe outrun the bullets right now.
Really?
Well, for us, we sell a $12,000 to $16,000 rifle system that somebody fully expects that they're going to be able to shoot anything in the world at 1,000 yards plus with. So for us, a precision standard is very significant, and lot to lot variation, consistency is very significant, and all these things. And I'll tell you, I've been using a bunch of different Federal products. We did a custom shop project with our accountant gun in a 308. This is like a 6-7 inch barrel with an integrally suppressed in a 308. Those freaking guns shoot like they average probably 3/8 MOA in our testing standards. Wow. And I mean, when we test, like we're really testing, a 3-shot group is stupid. That's not what we do. Like we're doing consecutive multi-shot groups. And this is out of their custom shop. They tuned the load for that barrel. Their capabilities are just off the chart. And then we've done a bunch of testing with the Federal Premium and then looked at what their lot-to-lot variation standard is and what their extreme spread standard is. Because that pretty much drives your capability to support customers into the future with long-range ammunition. I think the hardest job we do is actually loading our ammunition and keeping it consistent over time. So they're like 40 feet per second extreme spread, and then I think about that much on lot. Better not quote me there, but it's small enough that their Federal Premium line is pretty much like good enough for a 1,000-yard killing machine. And then their custom shop's even better. But I think with this high pressure, the effect on bullets, and it's not just disruption of the bullet, but then there's also the increased pressure at the muzzle. I've found that the gas pressure at the muzzle on bullet exit has a lot to do with dispersion. There's a couple things there that I feel like maybe the science of the speed and the capability there is absolutely wild and impressive and very interesting. It maybe has outstripped, the gun manufacturer's ability to handle that at the other end. Because I think, like, we started a trend a few years ago on shorter barrels.
Yeah.
Like, I remember taking my buddy elk hunting. I bet it's been 10 years. They were making guns, custom guns, and their idea was 28 nozzlers, and they were all shooting 28, 30-inch barrels. And I would just laugh at them. I mean, our longest barrel is 25 inches or something like that. And since then, I bet we've pushed our average down to 21, 22.
Mm-hmm.
So we should sell a lot of 20-inch and a lot of 22-inch barrels.
Mm-hmm.
So as soon as you start using cans, you start running shorter barrels, and good rangefinders, good ballistics, great bullets. Like, you realize you don't have to have these massive long barrels, and we've been pushing that for years. And usually, what happens is we push a trend, and then all the other rifle companies realize, oh, yeah, that's Gunwerks doing it. That's a good idea. So we'll do it. Like, we'll kind of break the stigma,
Mm-hmm.
and if nobody is going to sit down and argue a point of engineering on weapon systems with me. Like,
Mm-hmm.
nobody's going to do that. We're going to make smart choices, and if you're going to argue a smart choice, you're going to look like an idiot.
Mm-hmm.
So what we've seen is this trend. We've opened up the door for that shorter barrel thing, and that actually moves you closer and closer to the higher pressures, right? And there's a threshold. You get into that 16, 18-inch range, it's like you start having problems with precision. And so there's this threshold. Well, now all of a sudden we've just increased our pressure by 25, 30%. That's going to have an effect on that.
Yeah.
So I think bullets, I think barrel lengths, I think maybe muzzle devices, some other things. I think there's some advancements that are going to come along with this. But can you imagine a 6.5 Creedmoor case shooting 145, 147 grain bullet, 3,000 feet per second?
Yeah, that's amazing.
But that's what this technology is.
Yeah. It sounds too good to be true. It seems like this is the future, but it seems like, I'm sure, there's going to be hiccups and growing pains along the way.
It's going to be the precision.
Yeah.
Precision's going to be the challenge until some things catch up.
Yeah.
So we're on board. We're spooled up to do our Magnus MTX and our climber system, which are ultra lightweight. Mm-hmm. So the kit with the Backcountry is less powder, less case size, smaller, more compact ammo for that backcountry hunt, right? The guy that's cutting the handle off his toothbrush, here's the ultimate for you, right?
Yeah.
And then being able to maintain speed with a short barrel.
Mm-hmm.
Like, with a short barrel, you can still achieve these velocities that will get you terminal performance way down range. So I think that's the direction for it. And we've got two guns spooled up and ready to rock and roll, and we're not going to load that ammo. Like, in Gunwerks loads the ammo for the guns that it sells. We trust Federal. We know they'll do a great job. And when we've got a project in with their custom shop, they're going to do a specific load that supports Gunwerks weapon systems. And then we use that to support those guns. And so it'll kind of cut us out of the ammunition loop there. But like I said, we've worked with their custom shop enough. It will kick ass. We know. We have confidence. They're great.
So we'll talk about your rifle systems here in a second. Just to talk about that ammo, you sell Gunwerks ammo for a lot of different cartridges. Not going to be the case, you said, for the 7 Backcountry. You got Federal's custom shop doing that. Is that something that people are going to be able to buy 7 Backcountry ammo through you from Federal, or they need to buy it from Federal?
I suspect that we will try to do our customers a solid and maintain a safety stock, so that if there's ever some flexibility in delivery, like we do that, we try to keep everything in stock for our customers.
Yeah.
Because they're like me, they wait till the last minute, then you freaking need something that's in stock to save the day. So I think we'll do that, but like the custom shop is set up for customers to deal directly with them.
Okay.
So I would expect a lot of people go right there. When we did our accountant, that little short-barreled 308 integrally suppressed, we delivered it with a certain quantity of ammo with each gun, and I think we're just wrapping up the last of those deliveries. We're not going to stock that ammo, and every customer is connected directly to the custom shop for replenishment.
Okay, very good. All right. Tell us a little bit about a couple of your rifles, the Climber, the Magnus, and the Workman.
Okay. So when we started the company, we started out as a rifle assembly company, just like all these custom gun guys are right now. We'll go buy somebody else's action barrel, et cetera, put it together. One of the things that I learned in college was the way things physically move and react, and I really started to study the rifle system. I loved the elegance of the classic American rifle stock, and I recognized that some aspects of the design were not helping the customer in the shooting experience. And so deliberately, we took that standard American rifle system, which at best, the comb was flat. And we changed the comb to have a negative comb and moved the recoil pad up as much as we could to still clean the barrel so that we minimize the moment that raises the muzzle on recoil. And then it also makes the gun pull away from your face, right? When it pulls back, it pulls away from your face, which does two things. One, it doesn't slap you around, so it's more comfortable. So it doesn't hurt you. But it also decouples your face from the stock so that your face has less input on that movement that we talked about. So we developed that. The other thing that wasn't quite right on the classic American stock, which a lot of companies are still hung up on, but a lot of people have started moving away from, is if you go to the stock making book, they tell you the toe line goes from the toe straight in line to the rear screw. You draw that line, that's your toe line. It's too steep. Like the guys that built that weren't thinking about bipods and riding bags, right? Basically, the toe line was just for looks. They never supported it with anything. For us, we need to study and understand the interaction of the gun and the recoil impulse and your rear bag, your muzzle, aim point, all that stuff. And so we've played around with that toe line a lot. But the first thing we did on the LR1000 stock is we dropped that toe line and flattened it out a little bit, right? We kept a cheek piece. That stock actually had a little cast off toe out. And we made this hybrid blend of classic American design, like elegant design, plus a few real sneaky little engineering features. And it worked so good, we actually just kept our mouth shut about it for over a decade. We didn't tell anybody. We just kept our mouth shut, and we just started delivering guns that people would shoot, and they would be like, oh my gosh, there's no recoil. Like, oh my gosh, I can hit this thing at 1,000 yards. It's like I'm throwing away every other gun in my cabinet. And we built our company because we deliver something to somebody. It was a revelation in experience. Like it was something that was so different than they've ever had in their life, and it was so effective that it just changed everything. And they were evangelists. All of their friends they would pull in. Everybody they met, they would tell them how awesome it was. That's how we grew. And we thought, okay, this is great. We took let's give it a little bit more. So we developed a stock called the Magnus, and we really flattened that toe line and made some comb changes and a few other adjustments, a little bit more grip. And what we found with that was we made it so flat that really fast, hasty setup on a gun where you throw it down, you get behind it, slide your rear bag up to grab your elevation and shoot when you just have seconds to win. When we made the toe line so flat, we lost that ability to pull the bag back to grab that elevation adjustment. And so you had to have a squishy bag that you could squeeze and build that position.
Yep.
And I like the right connection on the rear bag. That has a lot to do with successful shot execution. In the Gen 2 version of the Magnus, we brought that toe line back up into what our years of experience in shooting told us was the right dimension for a precision long range rifle. And then we brought the Climber version, which would update the Sporter type, where we actually gave it a little faster slope on that toe line because we set that gun up to be more hastily configured. It's a better offhand gun. That's why we use that stock as the platform for the skull for dangerous game gun. You get a sheep hunt or a high mountain hunt. Most of the time, you are not shooting 1,000 yards. Like you don't shoot 1,000 yards at a sheep. You get 400 or 500 yards so you can see what it actually is. But you might have a really crazy position you have to shoot from. So we made that just a little bit faster in the toe line and its adjustment. So what we tried to do with the Climber and Magnus was really balance that. So LR1000, Magnus Gen 1, then the next evolution of our products was the Climber and Magnus Gen 2.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been our core product for quite some time. We entered into the stock making business when we invented and brought those stocks to market. Most people that do stocks use methods that require a lot of round corners. And so if you look at a lot of, I don't need to say names, but and I'm not saying it's bad. It's just it's a different style. But they do a lot of round, soft edges so they can get the compactions and stuff they need. We invented a new stock process that used silicone bladders that would put immense frickin' pressures on our compaction, and we would build these shells that were 5-6 thousandths thick that had 5 or 6 layers of carbon fiber in them. They were super thin, super compact, awesome surface finish, and we could build hard edges into our product. So we could create some designs that were visually stunning, that like have effectual designs like our thumb shelf, and do some flats and a few other things. So some performance features, some visual features, and develop that process, develop those rifle stocks and kind of together so that we could ensure quality and throughput and performance. So that's our core, and we've built a few gun models off of those. The Magnus, we make muzzleloader off of that. You look at the Climber, we do that Skull, that dangerous game rifle, off of that stock. But generally, the Climber gets configured super light as a long-range mountain hunting rifle, and the Magnus gets configured light, but more for a long-range, do-all rifle.
Okay, very, very good. And then what about your Workman?
So if you go back to the Workman is a steel-barreled Magnus Gen 1.
Okay.
So it's got this really great stock, and there's a solid cult following. We've tried to discontinue that a couple times, and pitchforks come out every time. It's like, you have to keep that open, because inside the company and outside, because a lot of people really love the way that stock performs for them.
Okay, very, very good. All right,
don't forget the Nexus.
All right, let's talk about the Nexus.
So the Nexus is a ground-up design that we did that is not a Remington 700 platform, and it's aluminum action, barrel extension on a barrel, user-serviceable, user-changeable barrel system, a full-diameter bolt, machined aluminum magazine, full Arca rail compatible, like it leather inserts, big, huge thumb shelf, kind of the next advancements in stock technology for us. We engineered the thumb shelf, and we see a lot of guys copy our stuff, like the negative comb. Everybody's figured that out. They've pulled it in. The thumb shelf is kind of the next area that I see a lot of copy coming, and it's sort of hard to do because it makes for small spaces in the back, but that gives us the ability to not over control the gun, but to also absorb a significant amount of recoil in the hand where you don't notice it. And so you shoot a 300 in the Nexus, you'll be like, wait a minute, how heavy is this gun? It's only 6.9 pounds. Wait a minute. What's going on with this?
Yeah.
Because it's not computing in your calibration scale of what you would expect for recoil. So kind of the next advancement, we'll see guys really start picking that up. I'm starting to see it trickle out there. But that feature is very interesting in the effect it had on felt recoil.
Very interesting. All right. So I'm going to ask you one last question, and then we'll wrap up. You have to choose one to hunt with for the rest of your life. Either a single cartridge, and you can use any bullet, or a single bullet type that you can use in any cartridge. You choose cartridge or bullet, and which specific one?
7 PRC.
There you go.
No doubt. Let me put a hypothetical. If the ELDX would shoot as good as the ELD match, that 175 grain ELDX would be my go-to bullet. But I could do a lot of damage with a 180 Burger or the 180 ELD match. I would adjust accordingly.
Yes.
In my shot placement.
Okay, very good. Well, tell people where they can learn more about Gunwerks and your guys' podcast as well.
Okay, so if you want to consume content, you probably just go directly to our YouTube channel. Just go YouTube and then search for Gunwerks, Gunwerks. That's our trademarked spelling and name. anybody that tries to do a Gunwerks ripoff, they always have to spell it with an O, or else we'll go after them. So Gunwerks with an E, and then obviously our website. If you want to dive into some products and do some shopping, I'm going to apologize. We just upgraded our ERP system and website. We stripped out an old template, and we're kind of rebuilding on the fly. Mm-hmm. It is rough right now, and I wanted to just absolutely apologize for the experience. You can dig around, you can configure guns, but it's just not. It's not the seamless experience that we like to, and it's just, I'll take full responsibility there, but by mid-year 25, we'll have that tightened back up. Either YouTube channel or gunwerks.com.
Okay, well, very good. Aaron, thanks a lot for joining us on the show today. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. I know I sure did. Links to the Gunwerks website, their YouTube page, and their podcast are all in the show notes. Like I mentioned earlier, be sure to leave a review for the show or a comment on this episode with future episode requests. And also be sure to sign up for my mailing list and get that free ebook I mentioned earlier at biggamehuntingpodcast.com/ebook. Remember, you can make your dream hunt turn into a reality, and I can help. Thanks for listening. I'll see you back here next time on the Big Game Hunting Podcast.
This show may be over, but we have plenty more for you on our website. For more information on today's topic, as well as lots of other useful hunting resources, head over to the BigGameHuntingBlog.com. We look forward to having you back for the next episode. But until then, happy hunting.